Our kitchens today are filled with gadgets. We have everything from the simplest knife to the most complicated microwave ovens and all sorts of gadgets in between, things that plug into a wall all over our kitchens. Kitchens in the 18th century, it's all just simple pots and pans and the most simple utensils, all except for the very high-tech smoke jacks and the spit jack. These were a complicated clockwork mechanisms that were used to turn the meat on an open fire. These pieces would be the pinnacle of the art of blacksmithing, with gears that would have to fit just right for it to work. I have wanted something like this for years for the kitchen, and I'm gonna have Brandon work on one.
A spit jack promotes a lot of challenges. There are a lot of moving parts, and all these parts have to mesh together perfectly for it to operate. If anything binds up, it'll hold up the whole operation, and you'll have to find that bind, fix it, and then it'll run smoothly. All these parts have to be square to one another. A lot of accuracy is needed to make this work. For the spit jack to run smoothly, all the parts have to have a lot of final finishing. Everything has to be very accurate. But we have to do the rough forging first, and that forging also has to be accurate. We need our sides to be symmetrical, we need our tops and bottoms to be symmetrical, and all our holes punched in just the right spots. The first piece we're going to work on is part of the frame. We'll work on one of the side pieces. And those pieces are the ones that have the main holes for the shafts and the spindles. Now the tops of this, we're going to do a little decorative curl on each end. A lot of times these spit jacks were very decorative. A lot of work went into them, a lot of artistry. Just like clocks in the time period, it was a work of art as well as something to be used. For one of our side pieces, you can see all the different holes that each one needs. We need our shaft holes, and then we also need the holes to rivet in our top and bottom pieces. Then we also need holes to mount the mounting brackets, because this thing needs to be mounted to a solid surface. Now that we have our side pieces made, we need to make the top and the bottom. These aren't as decorative, it's without these curls, but it's still just as important to make sure they're the exact same size, top and bottom, and left to right, and that these are square. Because when we rivet these together, it all needs to be square so that these holes line up with the holes on the other side so that everything runs smoothly. All we need to do for these pieces is bend these over to a 90-degree angle, drift some holes into it. The main thing is that we make sure that they're both exactly the same size. The last piece that we need to do any rough forging on is the fly. And it is the piece that regulates the speed of the whole spit jack. And all we need to do is take this round piece and we need to curl this up on either end just to give a little bit of extra weight to each end. And that's what will help drive it around and regulate the speed. All right, we're done with our rough forging. Now to take all of our pieces back to the shop and do all the final finishing, getting everything smooth and ready to fit together just right, and then to do our final assembly. Here's all the pieces that we need to assemble this worm jack. I have them all laid out so it's nice and easy to see the dimensions and how they relate to each other. Now when we assemble this, we have to do it in the right order. You can't just start assembling pieces here and there. They have to go in the right order so that you can fit them all together. The main thing with the construction of this is it's not held together with screws or pins. It's all peened over with rivets, and the gears are held in place by chiseling into the corners of the square shaft to peen those in to squeeze all the pieces together. Once it's assembled, it's not going to be easy to disassemble it. So it's a one-shot deal. This is the top shaft with the pinion, and then each side has to be rounded and then fit into the corresponding hole in the side of the frame. Don't want them too tight, but you don't want them too loose either. They can't slop. The main shaft, which holds the spool and the main drive gear and then the ratchet plate. The next shaft is the worm shaft, and then the end of it, it has a very fine point, and that will go into a little hole, and what that does is it allows the least amount of friction as it spins, because we want this to spin freely. The main wheel that I hand cut and filed has this cross piece in the center. And that's not just to reduce the weight or keep the weight on the outside of the wheel. That's also to add a place for the ratchet to catch. As we operate this, we're going to wind up the weight and the ratchet is going to catch on each one of these pieces That'll help drive it. And then our smaller worm gear wheel here, it has a square in it so that it locks into the shaft and it'll help drive. The ratchet plate will also attach to the wooden spool. And this will have an intricate little ratchet, and we'll show you how to make that later. And we have our brackets for the fly. This one with the small hole for the point of the worm shaft to give it the less friction. One of the wooden pulleys will go onto the main worm jack. The other one will go onto the spit. And those will have a rope or a belt in between them that will actually drive the whole thing. The other wooden part is the spool, and this will have the rope wound up on it. And this will also engage through that ratchet plate to the main gear that'll actually drive the whole thing. And then finally, just a simple handle that'll be used for the crank to wind up the weight. The first step to assembly is to start assembling the frame. So we'll do one side and then the top and bottom. We'll get those riveted together, but we can't do the other side yet. We have to assemble all the other pieces on the inside before we put the other side of the frame on. It'll kind of cap it off and lock everything together. Originally, I was going to assemble all the pieces and then put the brackets on, but in second thought, I think it might be easier to just go ahead and do them now. I don't think they'll be in the way too much. Went ahead and put the bottom bracket on for the worm and just make sure, yep, spins really good, and make sure it's lined up with the holes for the top bracket. Yeah, we're looking pretty good. We can always tweak stuff a little bit if we need to. Probably the most intricate piece of this whole unit is the ratchet system that actually engages the spool into the main drive gear. And we have some little parts here, the actual ratchet tooth and the pin that will be the axle for it, and our little spring, and then our two plates here that will actually hold that all together. And then it will be riveted into the plate, this ratchet plate. And this plate is what will connect to the spool that'll help drive everything. It's very important that you have this assembled in the right way, not backwards, because you want it to catch. The whole point of having this ratchet is so that you can crank the handle and wind up the weight without having it to operate the whole machine. It kind of disconnects the weight from the machine so that you can wind it up. And then once you let go, this ratchet is what connects and engages with the main drive wheel. The main shaft, which has the spool, is square for the most part, except for the round ends that fit into the frame. Those need to spin freely. We have these square bits here that will lock that wooden spool into the square shaft. Then the other side will have our ratchet plate, and it has a square into it, so everything's locked together. But the main wheel, it has a round hole, and it needs to be able to spin freely. So it's never locked in. The only way it locks in is by that ratchet tooth. Now that we have this assembled, we need to get it lined up, and we need to cut in on the corners of the shaft to lock it into place. So this is all done, and we'll use that same process of cutting in on the corners to set our next gear on the top shaft, the pinion shaft. That gear, it has to be lined up just perfect with the worm. So we have to get it centered just right, just the right place on that shaft to make sure that everything lines up and runs properly. We have all of the different shafts and pieces assembled and put together, and we have our other side of the frame here. Now this is the point where you want to make sure you have everything just right before you rivet these together. You can change stuff now, but once I rivet these together, it'll be a little trickier to change it. Now that we have the frame and all that put together, the next step is the worm. And we need to put that in and put this down and rivet that on. And once we get that set, then we can take the fly and put that on the top too. This is our counterweight, kind of our flywheel. It regulates the speed and keeps the whole thing going. Then we also have our handle here to help wind up the weight that actually drives it. And then we have the pulley that will be connected by a rope to the spit that will provide the actual rotation. We have it all assembled. The next step is take it to the kitchen and get it set up on the hearth with the spit and get it ready to cook. All right, we've got our spit jack mounted to the wall. We've got everything in the proper location. We have the belting down to the actual spit. One of the things with these is there's only one way that this can be lined up to the spit, You can't spin it 90 degrees this way because everything has to line up. So we had to go through that and get everything set up so it's specific just for this kitchen. This whole mechanism is actuated by weight. Here we have a rock, but any sort of heavy thing could have been used. And that will actually give power to the whole unit. But you also have the fly up here, which has to be just the right weight on the end of it, and it has to be just the right weight out to give the right spin, and that also has to coordinate with the right amount of weight. So you have to get both of those in line to each other for the whole thing to operate.
I'm excited to have this installed in the kitchen. In the 18th century, this would have been the most expensive piece of equipment in your kitchen. The fanciest, most technologically advanced kitchens would have these. So I'm excited that our German kitchen here has this installed and ready to go. Now, when it comes to roasting meat on the spit, most of the instructions in the 18th century are so very, very simple. They're like, well, put it on the spit, you know, have it a certain distance from the fire. And sometimes they talk about being careful about making sure the spit is clean because you're using kind of coarse and sometimes gritty materials to clean the spits. We've made sure this spit is nice and clean. We're going to put a large piece of beef on here. You can see that it's got two little forks that specifically hold on to the meat and pin it to the spit. Particularly for this, it's got the little pulley on the end and it will rotate along with the spit jack on the wall. This one's a simple clockwork spit jack that is meant to use with a weight. There are even fancier ones that you will find in the 18th century that use the power of the smoke going up the chimney. And they'll have a vane that goes inside the chimney. It'll turn with the smoke or the heat that rises through the chimney. It'll use that to turn the spit. Now, that is very tricky to do, and also it can inhibit the draft of your chimney. So this kind that uses the weight, probably a better design. I really want to thank Brandon for all the hard work he did on the spit jack. This was not an easy project, and it took a lot to get this to start working properly. And you know, the directions in the book are pretty simple. You know, it's tab A, slot B, etc. Well, it's just not that easy. And it was great to try this out here in the kitchen, wind it up and get a piece of meat on there and really kind of work out all the kinks. It's amazing to be a part of a project like this, especially right here at the end where we get to test it, find out how it really worked. And this meat turned out perfectly even because it was on the spit jack the entire time, turning away, and it looks great. I can't wait to try it out. You go ahead, you try out your piece, I'll try out my piece. Turned out just right, and you know, it's had a chance to cool down. It smelled just so good coming off the spit there out of the fire, and wow, this was tremendous. And for the perfect added flavor, try just a little bit of mushroom ketchup.